The night was heavy with silence as Ethan walked into the dimly lit room, his breath sharp against the cold air. He thought of his mother's voice that once soothed him, now only an echo. Ethan said, "Why did it have to end like this?" His trembling hands clutched an old photograph, its edges torn, his father's smiling face frozen in time. The pain surged, crushing his chest as memories of betrayal surfaced. A secret whispered years ago now roared like thunder, leaving him gasping for air. Shadows danced on the cracked walls, mocking his grief. Ethan said, "I cannot carry this weight anymore." The floor beneath him felt unstable, as if his very world was collapsing. He fell to his knees, shattered by the truth he could no longer deny. His heart screamed for peace, but all he found was emptiness. The photograph slipped from his fingers, landing face down, as if turning its back on him. In that moment, the silence became unbearable, pressing on his soul. The room was still heavy with grief when Sarah entered, her footsteps hesitant against the wooden floor. Sarah said, "Ethan, you can't keep drowning like this." Her voice cracked, torn between worry and sorrow. Ethan turned away, his shoulders rigid, unable to face her. The air thickened with unspoken truths that neither dared to voice. Sarah reached for his arm but stopped halfway, the space between them a chasm of pain. Sarah said, "I'm here even when you push me away." Ethan's silence screamed louder than words, his body trembling as if each breath burned. He wanted to collapse into her comfort, but guilt chained him. The photograph on the floor seemed to accuse him with every glance. The silence stretched on, suffocating them both. Sarah's eyes welled with tears, yet she stood firm, refusing to leave him in darkness. Ethan finally broke the silence, his words heavy. Ethan said, "You don't understand what this has done to me." His voice trembled with rage and despair. Sarah's eyes searched his face, aching to bridge the distance. She whispered, "Then help me understand." His chest tightened, torn between confessing and hiding the unbearable truth. He turned sharply, his back to her, the shadows wrapping him in secrecy. His fingers dug into his palms, pain grounding him in the moment. Sarah said, "You can't fight this alone." The truth clawed at him, demanding to be freed, but fear held it back. His silence filled the room again, louder than his words. The air grew colder as the clock ticked louder, echoing against their silence. Ethan pressed his forehead against the wall, whispering to himself. Ethan said, "I am trapped in this cage of memories." Sarah stepped closer, her voice softer, almost pleading. Sarah said, "Please don't shut me out." His shoulders slumped, exhaustion weighing him down. He longed for release, yet feared the storm it would bring. Sarah's trembling hands hovered near his back, aching to comfort him. The photograph lay abandoned on the floor, a cruel reminder of wounds still raw. Ethan finally turned, his eyes red with tears, yet burning with defiance. Ethan said, "I cannot escape what has been done." Sarah's lips quivered, her heart aching for him. She said, "You are more than your scars." His breath hitched, torn between surrender and resistance. The weight of his father's absence bore down on him, a wound that refused to heal. Ethan's gaze dropped to the photograph, its face-down silence louder than any scream. He clenched his fists, trembling with a fury that masked his pain. Sarah stepped forward, courage lighting her eyes. Sarah said, "Let me carry this with you." His silence lingered, but the crack in his armor had begun to show. Morning light filtered through cracked blinds, washing the room in pale gold. Ethan sat on the edge of his bed, shoulders hunched, lost in shadows of memory. Ethan said, "Every sunrise feels like punishment." His fingers traced invisible scars across his wrist, reminders of nights he wished to forget. The silence pressed heavy, broken only by the tick of a weary clock. Sarah stood by the door, her eyes lingering with unspoken concern. Sarah said, "You cannot bury this forever, Ethan." His jaw clenched as the photograph's absence haunted him. His father's laughter rang faintly in his ears, piercing through his walls. Ethan muttered, "He left me in pieces." Sarah moved closer, her voice trembling with compassion. Sarah said, "But you are still here." The words struck him like fragile truth, yet he recoiled, unable to believe. Shadows of betrayal loomed, choking the fragile hope between them. Ethan rose, pacing across the wooden floor, his movements restless and uneven. Ethan said, "Every memory is a chain." His fists clenched tightly, knuckles pale. Sarah stepped forward, her voice steady despite her breaking heart. Sarah said, "Chains can be broken." His laugh was bitter, echoing like shattered glass. Ethan said, "Not when the prison is inside me." Her gaze softened, sorrow clouding her eyes. She whispered, "Then let me walk through it with you." His silence was sharp, his eyes fixed on the cracks along the wall. The weight of secrets pressed against his chest, suffocating him with every breath. He longed to speak, but fear bound his tongue. His heart ached, yet his silence screamed louder than words. The room trembled with tension, fragile as glass. Later that day, Ethan walked through the quiet cemetery, the wind cold against his face. Rows of gravestones blurred as tears filled his eyes. Ethan whispered, "I don't know how to forgive you." His father's stone loomed before him, gray and unyielding. Ethan's hands trembled as he placed fresh flowers down, their colors vivid against the dull stone. His breath caught, his chest rising with unsteady rhythm. Sarah stood behind him, silent but present, her eyes heavy with empathy. The world seemed muted, every sound swallowed by grief. Ethan said, "You broke us, and now I am left to carry it all." The words cracked through the still air, his voice raw with anguish. His knees nearly buckled, but Sarah's hand hovered near, ready to steady him. The weight of absence bore down, suffocating, yet undeniable. As dusk fell, Ethan returned home with Sarah at his side, silence binding them. The air smelled of rain, dampness clinging to the walls. Ethan collapsed into his chair, weary from grief. He muttered, "I am drowning in ghosts." Sarah sat across from him, her eyes sharp with quiet resolve. Sarah said, "Then face them, Ethan, or they will consume you." His eyes darted away, fear pooling in his silence. The ticking clock seemed louder, each second mocking him. Shadows stretched across the walls, curling like demons. He whispered, "The truth will destroy me." Sarah's voice broke softly. Sarah said, "The truth will set you free." Their gazes locked, fragile hope trembling between them. His breath quivered as his soul waged war within. Night deepened as Ethan sat alone. The photograph returned to his hands. He traced its edges, his fingers shaking with despair. Ethan whispered, "I see him every time I close my eyes." His voice fractured like glass under strain. Sarah's voice lingered in his memory, urging him to face his pain. He pressed the photograph to his chest, as though holding on to something slipping away. His body trembled, eyes red and swollen. He said, "I can't let go, but I can't hold on." The room was silent, suffocating him with his own heartbeat. Outside, the rain tapped steadily against the window, a mournful rhythm echoing his soul. Ethan's eyes closed, surrendering to exhaustion, but the ghosts remained, haunting the silence of the night. The evening sky was bruised with shades of crimson as Ethan walked along the empty street, shadows stretching long behind him. His thoughts clawed at his mind like restless ghosts. Ethan whispered, "I cannot outrun what is inside me." His footsteps echoed against the cracked pavement, each one heavy with memories. A figure emerged from the shadows, Michael, his estranged brother, his presence sharp as a blade. Michael said, "You think silence absolves you?" Ethan froze, his chest tightening with dread. Old wounds resurfaced like fresh scars, pulsing with anger. Michael stepped closer, his eyes dark with bitterness. Michael said, "You abandoned me just like him." Ethan's fists clenched, his voice shaking. Ethan said, "I was drowning too." The air thickened with rage and sorrow, their words cutting deeper than silence ever could. Tension simmered as Michael stepped closer, his voice rising like thunder. Michael said, "You let him destroy us, and you stood there doing nothing." Ethan's face twisted with pain, his words caught between guilt and defense. Ethan said, "I was just a boy, Michael. I carried what I could." Michael's eyes burned with fury, fists trembling at his sides. He spat, "You were supposed to protect me." The silence that followed cut deeper than their words, their shared grief binding them in a prison of blame. Ethan's breath faltered as the weight of truth pressed hard. Michael's jaw tightened, his body trembling with rage he could no longer contain. Ethan staggered back, his hands raised in defense, though no blow had landed yet. Ethan said, "You think I didn't suffer? Every night I begged for escape." Michael's face contorted, anger masking his own pain. Michael said, "Then why leave me alone in the ruins?" The words pierced like glass through Ethan's chest. He struggled to breathe, his voice breaking. Ethan whispered, "I failed you, but I never stopped carrying you with me." Michael's rage faltered for a fleeting second, grief flickering in his eyes, but he masked it with a sharp glare. Michael said, "Too little, too late." The cold wind howled, carrying the weight of their fractured bond. The streetlight flickered, shadows dancing between them like specters of the past. Michael's voice softened, though bitterness remained. Michael said, "He broke us, Ethan, but you let him win." Ethan's tears glistened in the weak light as his voice cracked. Ethan said, "I was broken too, Michael. I had nothing left to give." Their words lingered in the air, fragile and sharp. Michael's hands trembled, not from anger, but from grief long denied. Ethan stepped closer, his eyes pleading for forgiveness. Ethan said, "We only survived because we held onto fragments." Michael's breath hitched, his defenses trembling as silence swallowed his rage. The silence broke with the sound of distant thunder, as Ethan's voice grew steadier, though his heart quaked. Ethan said, "We were both victims, Michael, but carrying this hate is killing us." Michael's face twisted, eyes burning with unshed tears. He spat, "And forgiveness will erase it all?" Ethan shook his head, sorrow heavy in his words. Ethan said, "Not erase, but heal." Michael's chest rose and fell with rapid breaths, his jaw clenched, his body torn between collapsing and fighting. The storm overhead mirrored their turmoil, flashes of lightning illuminating their haunted faces. For the first time, Michael's silence spoke not of anger, but of pain too deep to name. The night had softened into quiet, though Ethan's heart remained heavy. He sat on the porch, the cold air brushing against his skin. His eyes wandered toward the stars, searching for peace he could not claim. The sound of footsteps approached, steady and gentle. Claire emerged from the shadows, her presence warm against the cold. Claire said, "You always hide in silence." Ethan looked away, fear flickering in his eyes. He muttered, "Silence is safer than words." Claire moved closer, her eyes holding a kind of strength he could not match. Claire said, "Safe doesn't heal." Ethan's chest tightened, her truth cutting through his armor. For the first time his gaze met hers, trembling but unbroken. Ethan rubbed his hands together, the chill biting deeper into his skin than he wanted to admit. He whispered, "Words never saved me before." Claire lowered herself beside him, her eyes glowing in the dim light. Claire said, "Maybe words won't save you, but they can free you." His breath shook as her closeness threatened to unravel him. He whispered, "I don't know how to let anyone in." Claire's hand brushed against his, steady and certain. Claire said, "You don't have to know. You just have to try." His chest ached as though the cage inside him rattled open for a fleeting moment. Silence wrapped them both, not in emptiness, but in fragile possibility. The porch creaked under their silence, broken only by the wind brushing through the trees. Ethan lowered his head, his voice ragged. Ethan said, "I am afraid of breaking again." Claire's eyes softened with empathy, her words gentle yet firm. Claire said, "You're already broken, Ethan, but broken doesn't mean worthless." His breath caught, his chest tightening at the tenderness in her voice. His trembling hand reached for the photograph lying beside him, the edges worn and fragile. Ethan whispered, "This is all I have left of him." Claire placed her hand over his, steady and warm. Claire said, "Then let it remind you not of the pain, but of the strength it takes to survive it." His eyes burned as tears gathered, but for the first time, they carried release, not only grief. Ethan's silence stretched, but Claire remained steady, her presence refusing to waver. He said, "I have lived in shadows for so long, I don't know who I am without them." Claire leaned closer, her voice unwavering. Claire said, "You are more than your shadows. You are every moment you chose to survive." His breath trembled, his eyes falling shut as the weight of her words pressed against the walls he had built. The night seemed to hush around them, as though listening. Claire's hand lingered against his, her warmth pulling him from the cold. He whispered, "I don't deserve this." Claire's gaze held him firmly, her voice soft but fierce. Claire said, "Everyone deserves light, Ethan. Even you." The stars shimmered above them, faint reminders of light in the endless dark. Ethan turned to Claire, his voice quieter now. Ethan said, "If I fall again, will you still be here?" Claire's lips curved into the gentlest smile, her eyes unshaken. Claire said, "I'll be here, even in the falling." His breath caught, the raw vulnerability spilling into the night. Ethan whispered, "I don't know how to love without fear." Claire reached forward, brushing his cheek with soft courage. Claire said, "Then let love and fear exist together, and let them teach you." His chest rose with a long broken sigh as a fragile warmth stirred within him. For the first time, Ethan allowed himself to lean into her presence, not as a shield but as a lifeline. The storm had passed, leaving the night thick with silence. Ethan sat alone in his mother's old study, the faint scent of dust and forgotten papers filling the air. His hands searched through boxes stacked in shadows, every object a memory waiting to wound. His trembling fingers landed on a sealed envelope, yellowed with time. Ethan said, "What is this?" His chest tightened as recognition rippled through him. The handwriting was his father's. His heart pounded, as though trying to stop him from breaking the seal. He whispered, "I am not ready for this truth." But his hands betrayed him, tearing open the envelope. The first words pierced his soul like glass, revelations dripping from every line. The letter trembled in his grip as Ethan read the words, each line clawing into his chest. His father confessed to betrayals long buried, secrets wrapped in silence. Ethan said, "He destroyed us and he knew it." His voice cracked, rage and sorrow colliding. The truth struck harder than the absence had ever done. The man he longed to forgive had been the very architect of their ruin. Tears blurred the ink, but he kept reading, unable to stop the unraveling. His father had chosen escape over family, leaving scars to fester. Ethan whispered, "All these years, and he never came back to mend it." The words shattered him, leaving him gasping in the still air. The door creaked open as Michael entered, his footsteps heavy with suspicion. He eyed the letter in Ethan's hands, his face hard with unspoken questions. Michael said, "What did you find?" Ethan's breath faltered, his eyes red with grief. Ethan whispered, "The truth. He left us by choice." Michael's body stiffened, his jaw locking with fury. Michael said, "You're lying." His denial spilled sharp and bitter, but his eyes betrayed fear. Ethan placed the letter on the desk, his hands trembling. Ethan said, "Read it yourself." Silence filled the space as Michael's fingers hovered over the paper. The truth loomed between them, heavier than the years of anger they had carried. Michael's eyes devoured the words, his breath quickening with every line. His voice cracked, rage and grief colliding. Michael said he abandoned us. He chose to leave. The paper shook in his grip, as though it carried fire. Ethan's face softened with sorrow, but his eyes carried relief in truth unveiled. Ethan whispered, "We were never the cause. It was his weakness, not ours." Michael staggered back, as though struck, his world collapsing under the weight of revelation. For the first time, his anger faltered, grief spilling through the cracks. Michael said, "All this hate, for nothing." His body trembled, his defenses shattering in the quiet storm of truth. The silence that followed was louder than thunder, filling every corner of the room. Ethan stood, his voice trembling but steadying with truth. Ethan said, "We were children, Michael. We carried his sins, but they were never ours." Michael's shoulders slumped, his breath uneven, his rage dissolving into grief. His eyes welled with tears he could no longer hold back. Michael whispered, "I wasted my life hating you." Ethan placed a hand on his brother's shoulder, the weight of years softening in the gesture. Ethan said, "Then let us not waste what's left." The letter lay between them, not as a wound, but as a scar finally revealed. The night pressed heavy as rain lashed against the windows, thunder growling like an old wound. Ethan stood in the living room, soaked in turmoil, his breath unsteady. He shouted, "I carried his sins until they became mine." His fists slammed against the table, rattling the broken lamp. Michael stood opposite, his face twisted with anguish torn between fury and grief. Michael said, "We let him own us long after he was gone." Claire stepped forward, her voice soft but resolute. Claire said, "Then let him go tonight, or he will bury you both." Lightning split the sky, casting shadows that flickered like ghosts across their faces. Ethan's eyes glistened, his soul unraveling under the weight of the moment. Ethan staggered back, his chest rising in sharp bursts as the truth gnawed at him. He whispered, "If I let go, who am I?" Michael's voice cracked, raw and unfiltered. Michael said, "You are not him, Ethan. You never were." The storm outside roared, echoing their turmoil. Claire's hand reached out, steady as a lifeline. Claire said, "You are the man who survived, and that is enough." Ethan's knees buckled as he collapsed to the floor, tears spilling freely. His sobs echoed louder than thunder, his walls shattering. For the first time, grief became release, not prison. Michael fell to his knees beside him, his hand trembling as it rested on his brother's shoulder. Lightning lit the room in fractured flashes, illuminating the rawness between them. Ethan gasped, "I hated you, Michael, for carrying your anger into me." His words shook with guilt and honesty. Michael's eyes filled with tears as he answered, "And I hated you for leaving me in the dark." The storm outside quieted for a heartbeat, silence anchoring their truths. Claire's voice broke through, gentle yet commanding. Claire said, "Hate will chain you forever, but love can free you now." Ethan's head lifted, his tear-streaked face trembling with vulnerability. He whispered, "Then I choose to stop hating." Michael's breath caught, his expression breaking into raw sorrow as he pulled Ethan into a trembling embrace. The storm's rage gave way to soft rain, its rhythm like a lullaby against the shattered night. Ethan pulled back from Michael, his eyes clearer though still wet. Ethan said, "We survived, but survival is not living." Michael nodded, his voice hoarse. Michael said, "Then tonight, we begin again." Claire's eyes shone, her voice steady with faith. Claire said, "Healing is not forgetting, it is choosing to rise despite the scars." Ethan's trembling hand reached for the torn photograph on the table, his father's face staring up in silence. He whispered, "You no longer own me." With a steady breath, he laid the photograph down and stepped back, his soul lighter. The silence that followed felt sacred, as though the house itself exhaled. Ethan turned toward Claire, his eyes fragile but no longer hollow. Ethan said, "I don't know what tomorrow will look like, but I want to face it." Claire smiled softly, her touch brushing his cheek with quiet strength. "Claire," said, "tomorrow doesn't need to be perfect. It only needs to be real." Michael's gaze lingered on them both, his shoulders slumping, the years of burden finally easing. He whispered, "For the first time I feel free." Ethan's chest rose with a deep, steady breath as dawn's light broke faintly through the rain-washed window. The storm was over, but the scars remained as proof of survival. The storm had faded, leaving the world washed in fragile dawn. Ethan stood at the window, watching golden light stretch across the horizon. His chest rose in slow rhythm, no longer chained by suffocating silence. He whispered, The night is over. Behind him, Michael stirred, exhaustion softening his rugged face. Michael said, "It feels strange to wake without rage." Claire entered quietly, her smile tender, her presence grounding. Claire said, "That is the beginning of healing." Ethan's eyes glistened, tears still fresh but carrying hope. For the first time he breathed without fear, tasting the promise of renewal. Later that morning, Ethan and Michael walked through the quiet cemetery, the earth still damp from rain. Ethan carried no flowers this time, only steady breath. He said, "We came here to grieve, but we leave with truth." Michael's eyes scanned the gravestones, his voice low. Michael said, "He will not haunt me anymore." The silence that followed was no longer suffocating, but cleansing. Claire stood a few steps behind, watching with gentle eyes. She whispered, "This is the place you release, not the place you stay." The brothers shared a glance, their bond no longer fractured but fragile, stitched together by truth. By afternoon, they gathered at the porch, the air warm with the scent of fresh rain. Ethan sat with Claire beside him, his gaze fixed on the open road. Ethan said, "For years I feared tomorrow. Today, I want to meet it." Claire leaned closer, her eyes soft with quiet strength. Claire said, "Tomorrow isn't a threat, it's a chance." Michael leaned against the porch railing, his shoulders finally at ease. Michael said, "Maybe we learn how to live, not just survive." The silence between them was no longer void but connection. The air hummed with possibility, fragile yet real. As evening approached, Ethan sat alone by the riverbank, water glistening under the fading sun. His reflection rippled, no longer a stranger's face but his own. Ethan whispered, "I survived him, but I also survived myself." The breeze carried the scent of earth and water, soothing the ache in his chest. Claire's voice drifted from behind, gentle and reassuring. Claire said, "And now you live, Ethan." He turned, his eyes softening at her presence, no longer afraid of love's weight. His breath deepened, the river's flow mirroring the release in his heart. For the first time, peace didn't feel unreachable. Night returned, but it no longer carried the weight of despair. Ethan stood outside beneath the stars, his chest rising with steady breath. He said, "I am not healed, but I am no longer broken beyond repair." Michael joined him, silence their truest language, their bond unspoken yet strong. Claire stepped between them, her hand finding Ethan's, grounding him. The three stood together, shadows cast by moonlight, scars etched but no longer chains. Ethan whispered, "This is not the end. This is the beginning." The stars shimmered above as though listening, the night carrying not sorrow, but hope.